All right, so we're going to begin by drawing our cones, which are going to be done lightly in pencil. And my paper is just shaped like this. Yours does not have to be shaped like this. Might be a little hard to see on the camera. There you go. They're just they're like 3 V's. Okay, so I have my watercolors. I have some water, and I have a brush, and I have paper towels. You could use a cloth. You don't have to use paper towels. So the first thing I'm going to do is get my brush wet and get some brown, but I just want a little bit. I want it to be mostly water because we're going to do a wash, which is mostly water, not a lot of color. So I'm going to fill in each of my cones with this light brown wash. While the wash is still wet, if you wanted to kind of challenge yourself a little bit, you could do a little shadow, kind of drop in a little bit more brown on the one side if you wanted to. But if that makes you nervous, then just do a wash. Okay, like that. All right, so we're gonna let that dry. We wanna make sure that we really don't see our brush strokes in there, and we try to stay in the lines if we can. All right, so for our first cone, ice cream scoop, we can do a little, almost like a worm. And then we can add the ice cream on top. Oops. All right, and now with our paintbrush, we'll pick a color that we want. You can use any color that you want. And we're gonna practice making a lot of color on our brush right along this edge. I'm gonna do this quickly so that it doesn't really dry, because then we wanna rinse that off our brush mostly. And while my brush is still wet, I want to pull up some of this into so I'm kind of erasing that hard edge at the top and pulling it up into the ice cream. All right, and then I can sort of do the same thing at the top where I have a darker orange kind of outlining the top like this. And it doesn't have to be orange. Now I'm rinsing off my brush, and it's just like now it's just like kind of like a clean mop. I'm just pulling down some of that color into the ice cream cone, and I'm gonna leave the center white. So it kind of gives it this sort of 3D feel, where this sort of 3-dimensional scoop is sitting on top there, okay? Now down here, I'm going to fill in the bottom with a dark, kind of opaque color, and then again, cleaned off my brush, and I'm just pushing around some of that color to fill in that space with a lighter orange. Okay, now we can do the same thing again. This time we could leave out the little worm if we want, and we could just do another scoop if we want, and we could even do a 3rd scoop if we want. Doesn't really look like that's gonna work. It's gonna fall right off. So I'm gonna move that one over more like that. So same thing again. I'm gonna do a darker version of my color at the top, and then maybe down at the bottom. So our edges might have the darkest version of our color. Now I've cleaned off my brush, and I'm just using some clean water and my brush to pull some of that color in. Okay, now, oops. Once that's all filled in and it's still wet, if I want to get kind of creative, I could pick a color that's similar and add that in to make my painting a little bit more rich. So I grabbed a little green, and I'm going to drop in a little green just to make this a little bit more interesting. Watercolor is so much about how you just kind of push the color around on the paper without showing your brush strokes. So I'm trying to get like a gradient here, where nice and dark to really light, and it's sort of an even transition in between. So see, I just cleaned off my brush, and I just had a dry brush, and I just lifted up some of that color because it was almost like erasing, because I had a little bit too much right there. Okay, and then I'm going to go back to orange. Again, choose whatever color you want. It's going to be dark, and at the top it's going to be dark. And then I'm going to use my clean brush to mop it around and spread it all toward the center so that the center is left white. I'm even going to lift up some of that to make it really light. Lift up a little bit here so we get a pop. All right. Okay, and that is how we will do this for all of our ice cream cones. One thing you might want to try, instead of using the pencil, is just laying down some heavy color like this to form the top of one of your ice cream scoops. Clean off your brush. I even dried off my brush. Actually, I need a little bit of water on there, just a little bit of clean water. And I'm going to pull down some of this, just like this, to form my ice cream scoop. All right, and you could try that again. So much of watercolor is getting used to feeling the consistency of how much water and how much color you have on your brush at any time and what you need for what you're trying to do. So I have a pretty clean brush here with just a little bit of water on it, and I'm just using the brush now as a mop to pull down some of this color. And I'm trying not to touch the ice cream scoop on the bottom because I don't want to mess this one up. And if I want, I could probably add another one there, and that would be cool. All right. Now, you will do this one too. Now, what we want to do is get a grid in here for our ice cream cones. So I'm going to get some brown on my brush, but this time it's going to be mostly color and not a lot of water. And I'm just going to use the tip of my brush. I'm going to do some diagonal lines. They should all be parallel with each other. If you're not sure what parallel means, you should look it up or ask your math teacher. So now we want to go in the opposite direction. All right, and that gives us that grid for our ice cream cone. Another thing you could do, now that this is totally dry, is go in with some opaque, meaning mostly color, not a lot of water on your brush, just a lot of color. I have some red, and I'm going to add some little sprinkles over top of the wash that dried.